When I was a little girl, my childhood hero was Stan Brock. Now, you may not have heard of Stan Brock. Most of the girls my age back then in the 70s were more interested in the Bay City Rollers or Lee Majors, the guy from the $6 Million Man. But I adored Stan Brock, basically had a crush on Stan Brock. He was Marlon Perkins' assistant on the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which was this television show where they would go out into the wilderness and they would wrestle anacondas and they would deal with lions and bears, and Stan Brock was the guy who actually did all the super masculine stuff. He was the one who wrestled the anacondas. When I was about 9 years old, we found out Stan Brock was going to be the grand marshal of our little town's Christmas parade. And I was so excited, I couldn't believe that, my biggest crush was actually coming to our town. So I talked to my mom into taking me to the parade early, and I got on the very front of Main Street. I was sitting on the curb, and I was so excited before the parade started that I was actually going to see him in person. And I can still remember seeing him come into view. He was on this big horse. He was bareback. He also was barefooted. And he comes flying down Main Street on this horse. And when he got next to me, I know he winked at me. He may have been winking at everybody else, but it felt like he winked right at me. And he was so compelling, and he was so handsome. He had these huge shoulders. He's in this safari outfit, bareback on this horse. I was so drawn to him that I just started running down Main Street after Stan Brock and his horse. And of course, I stopped pretty soon, so I wouldn't give my mom a heart attack. I stopped by Faust's drugstore. But I can still remember just thinking, I can't believe he's that cool, he's that big, he's that brave. And I was thinking about that recently, and I thought, isn't it interesting that as a little girl, I knew what a compelling man was. But as a grown woman, I've really settled for safe in a savior. Whereas my childhood hero was this big, strapping, fierce man, the Jesus that was in my imagination for so many years kind of was more like Clark Kent, kind of a scrawny little guy. And I think some of that is fueled by sermons I've heard that emphasize Jesus as a carpenter, more so than him being a military commander. And I think part of it was also because I had squished Jesus into a smaller box because I needed him to be approachable. I needed him to be manageable. I was too afraid to imagine or picture Jesus as this great, big, wild redeemer because that was intimidating to me. So I focused on the lamb more than the lion. And I realized recently that, I need a bigger Jesus. As a grown woman, I want to experience all that Jesus is, not just the safe, approachable parts, but also the untamed parts, the controversial parts, the parts that are at first maybe just a little bit scary. And in understanding how big Jesus is, how compelling he is, that also gives me a clear picture of how amazing it is that he would pursue me, that all of that wildness would be channeled into this passionate pursuit of me.